Hey everybody, and welcome to another video in this social psych lecture series. In this video, we're going to be talking all about prejudice. And this is, like I said, a pretty heavy topic. This week of videos, prejudice, stereotyping, which was a previous video, and discrimination are all pretty heavy topics. This one is no different. I really like this particular comic, I guess. I mean, it's Superman, and this is Superman from like the 1940s, I want to say. Now, some messages are getting crossed here, but what Superman is telling you is, remember, boys and girls, your school, like your country, is made up of Americans of many different races, religions, and national origins. So if you hear anybody talk against a schoolmate or anyone else because of his religion, race, or national origin, don't wait. Tell him that kind of talk is un-American. Keep your school all American. Now, it's a great message, but there's likely some issues with the keep your school all American. Subtext there is about communism, I would imagine. It's hard to tell what date this is from. If anybody knows that, please let me know in the comments. But on its face, I do like the message. And you can clearly see there is only one person of color in this entire in this entire image. Everyone else is Whitey McWhiterson. Okay. Oops, sorry. Computer's just like boop. All right. So here's the outline. Outline's pretty self-explanatory, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna introduce prejudice, and we're gonna talk about some basic kinds. We're gonna focus in this video of sexism and racism, and probably that's where the vast majority of the live stream discussion on this topic is going to be, specifically with current events being focused heavily on the racism part. Then I will introduce microaggressions, which is something you may not be familiar with, but I think the video that I have in this is pretty good primer for it. And then we'll finish with automatic bias and the shooter bias studies, which generally speaking applies to many of the current events, or even just in the last several years of unjustified police killings of mostly black men, if not all black men, black women as well. I'm not going to get into too many current events in this video. That's what the live stream discussion is for. So I'm just going to focus on factual information here. Okay, so what is prejudice? Well, for this class, particularly for this class, we are going to define it as hostile or negative attitudes toward a distinguishable group based solely on group membership or even perceived group membership. Okay. And we follow the ABC model, of course. And so we are going to tackle the A, which is affect. So affect is the paradigm. Okay. So what is group? Now, we talked about groups in a previous video. And so what we're going to do with groups is have a very loose definition. Minimal group paradigm is what it's called. Minimal group paradigm. So very loose definition of what a group is. Do you have the same characteristics? Then you're a group. Okay. And just like with attitudes, we can measure implicit or explicit prejudices. Now, people are generally close to the vest regarding their explicit prejudices because, especially now, these are not socially desirable. But Implicit attitudes is where it's at. Okay. So here are some prejudices that you might or might not be familiar with. Black individuals with college degrees are 50%, are half as likely to be unemployed versus another race, typically, generally speaking, white folks. Black individuals are up to 70% less likely to receive complex medical treatment, which is a disaster right now with COVID intersecting with race. Okay. And then Black individuals are more likely to be shot while being arrested. And I'm pretty sure I don't have to give you any details about that. Now, where does some of this prejudice then turn to? Well, 85% of non-Black Americans, so white Americans, Hispanic Americans, and other races, okay, explicitly claim to have no racial preference. And so this is from Greenwald. Non-conscious association of a target category with a positive or negative evaluation is a better predictor of discrimination, which is the behavior part that we'll get to in the next video, than explicit prejudices are. Non-conscious associations of a target category with a positive or a negative evaluation, so a positive prejudice or a negative prejudice, again, we're focusing on negative prejudice here, is a better predictor of discrimination than explicit prejudice. Now, this is according to the IAT, which I discussed in a previous video, the implicit associations test. Wow, that's an incredible situation. Okay, so that's explicit versus implicit. Now, I wanted one last thing. People high in implicit prejudice are more likely to discriminate black job candidates, are less likely to recommend complex treatment to Black patients, and are more likely to shoot unarmed Black targets in computerized shooting tasks, which I'll explain at the end of this video. Okay, so high in implicit prejudice then leads to the discriminable behaviors that we then see as what we would consider explicit prejudice manifesting as discrimination. And yet 85% of non-Black Americans are like, nah, there's no preference for my race versus any other races, right? That's that colorblind argument. So, subtle bias. Prejudice is automatic, and it's quick. These affective judgments are quick. Okay. So these are some prejudices we experience in our modern world. I will say, as a white male, I do not suffer many of these prejudices. At being the majority characterization of this patriarchy. And thus, I cannot speak to the experience and experiences of these prejudices. That is my privilege, and that is something that we will talk about in more detail when we get to discrimination. Okay? Because it comes up quite a bit more with regard to behaviors and institutionalized and systemic issues related to these. So ambivalent sexism, modern racism, and automatic bias. So this basically covers the remainder of this video. So we're going to quickly talk about ambivalent sexism, what modern racism is today with an aside about microaggressions, and then we'll talk about those automatic biases and the shooter bias. Okay, so ambivalent sexism, okay, is characterized by two components. One is hostile sexism, okay, and this is an advertisement / meme from, we'll say the 1950s. We'll say so. Hostile sexism is literally overtly negative evaluations and stereotypes about women. Okay, so women need to know their places. They're incompetent and inferior to men in all things except for childbearing and child rearing, of course, which are traditional gender roles associated with women. So that's hostile sexism. Okay, that's hostile sexism. The other component of ambivalent sexism is what's called benevolent sexism. These are evaluations that of women, that appear subjectively positive, but are actually damaging to women and gender equity more broadly. So here I have a meme of a man, I guess 1950s, 1960s, somewhere around there. Real men still do this, the idea of chivalry. I hate to break it to you, but the idea of chivalry was never really a thing. Knights weren't that chivalrous. They were, generally speaking, rapey and brutish. Not the sort of modern depictions we have of Heath Ledger doing the horse thing with the, I can't think of the word. But in any case, so this image here is chivalry. Real men still do this. So there's a lot of problems with that, especially the real men part, but that's neither here nor there. It's the idea of chivalry that's being expressed here. While that seems positive, do nice things for your partner, your female partner. That's why not, right? But that damages real equity and real change. It feeds status quo of the underlying hostile sexism, which is that women are incompetent and inferior to men. That's not the case. That cannot be the case. Okay. So research has demonstrated over and over and over again that despite the positive tone and despite stemming from genuine positive feelings and good intentions toward women, benevolent sexism has clear negative implications. For instance, just like hostile sexism, benevolent sexism predicts endorsements of gender stereotypes, what we talked about in the previous video, as well as negative reactions to rape victims, which is what we'll talk about in a future video. Moreover, although benevolent sexism encompasses the conviction that women should receive male protection, research has shown that benevolent sexism is positively associated with attitudes that legitimize domestic violence. And finally, in international comparison, so cross-cultural studies, the national level of endorsement of benevolent sexism, this thing, my thumb, there, bing, is related to United Nations indicators of gender inequality, such as the participation of women in the economy and in politics. Okay. The United States has some of those indicators. Even though there are plenty of women in politics and in the economy, there are far fewer women broadly in both of those sectors. Researchers have explored reasons for why women might internalize ambivalent sexist attitudes toward other women. Women may develop benevolently sexist attitudes as a response to experiencing sexism themselves. So it's learning. It's a vicious cycle of perpetuation and socialization. Okay. Cross-cultural studies suggest that women's endorsement of sexism often reflects a culture of extreme hostile sexism among men in a given community. So something like machismo, okay, in Latinx communities. Some researchers argue that in cultures that are particularly hostile, women may internalize benevolent sexism as a protective mechanism. But again, it is actively working against gender equity. Okay? Not just gender equality, gender equity, parity for men and women, parity. Okay, the same in everything. Racism. So this is going to be a little interesting. So classic racism, which I have to say is not olden times racism. While this picture might be old, black and white, and of the KKK in their hoods marching near the US Capitol building, it is by no means of a bygone era. The KKK still exists, and though they don't operate in public very often, they still do things. So classic racism, I would say, I can say that with clarity of mind, that classic racism is subversive, subliminal, systemic, and overt. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's old and gone. It is still here. They're still here. And the systems that support them are still in place. Things like Jim Crow laws, voter registration laws that attempt to undermine the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Okay, so those structures are still in place. Much of the modern racism is covert. It's subtle. It is always meant to be with the quote-unquote best intentions, but it is rarely good. It is never good. Okay? So, this is just one idea of cultural appropriation among these four individuals showing cultural appropriation. Okay? This is not who I am, and this is not okay. It's an advertisement about Halloween costumes. Okay. So this is blackface over here. This is geisha face over here. I'm not entirely sure what this is. I can't really tell. Perhaps somebody having engaged in bestiality with a donkey. I'm not sure. Or riding a donkey. Can't tell. And then this one is obviously somebody wearing a Saudi, traditional Saudi garb, right? This person appears to be some sort of Arab descent, right? And so costumes of this, and you're probably aware of the, especially the blackface stuff that people are coming under fire for recently. Okay. So what is modern racism? Modern racism has evolved from aggressive, overt, prejudicial behavior, which is the KKK running around with their wizard robes on. Not a cool kind of wizard, by the way. Actually, fairly sad. Yeah. To a more subtle, prejudicial behavior. So this kind of action here, among other things. This type of subtle prejudicial behavior is often felt as what are called microaggressions, which I'll show you in just a minute. by individuals right growing up or in their day-to-day activities. Modern racism is the mindset that certain races are better or worse with specific innate abilities or weaknesses. For example, black athletes are often regarded as naturally athletic, while white athletes are often not seen as being unable to run fast or jump high, like the Woody Harrelson movie, White Men Can't Jump. White people are often regarded as naturally rational, fair, and caring, while black folks are often regarded as criminal, untrustworthy, and irrational. Wow. Asian people are often seen as intelligent, while Hispanic and Latinx people are regarded as unintelligent. All of these myths are seen as innate manifestations that are embedded in our subconscious belief systems. Many of these beliefs, are perpetuated by a media which show these stereotypes in different forms over and over and over and over again. Cartoons, movies, music videos, sitcoms, newspapers, magazines. What was a magazine? Websites, games even, computer games, video games. Stereotypes are also further reinforced by our school system in the curriculum that is covered and not covered. Case in point, everything that you probably learned about Native Americans was from a white perspective and has nothing to do with the actual experience of Native Americans in America, where they are the indigenous population, and Americans and other white settlers rendered them almost non-existent. But we don't hear about those stories. Yeah, we hear about Custer's Last Stand or the Trail of Tears and how awful a president Andrew Jackson was, even though he's on the $20 bill. Yeah, you hear about those things, but do you hear about anything else? Probably not. The story of Thanksgiving was not how it went down. So, yeah, the socialization we receive while growing up in our families also contributes greatly to our beliefs in inferiority and superiority of certain individual groups. Some of these beliefs become naturalized in the comments parents make, or relatives make, or friends make about other groups while children are growing up. That gets internalized and naturalized. Children come to accept these ideas without much thought. So what are microaggressions? Well, if you want to read about microaggressions, you can't really read this unless you enlarge the slide. So apologies. But microaggressions.tumblr.com has a buttload, just over and over and over again, about the kinds of microaggressions that people receive. So what are they? Everyday slights, snubs, or insults which communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to target persons based solely upon their group membership. It can be intentional or unintentional, controlled or uncontrolled. You're cute for a dark-skinned girl. That's wow, you're Mexican? I had no idea. You're lucky you're so white, which is a problem in Mexico. Got midterms back today, and a couple of white students looked and saw they have a higher grade than them and proceed to tell me I'm not really black because I make good grades. Like, what the hell? Anything that starts with I'm not sexist, but ... I'm not racist, but ... all of that. All of that is microaggressions and or overtly sexist / overtly racist. Okay, so I have a video that is from Fusion that I'd like to share with you. It's very quick. Very quick. So let's play that.
For people who still don't think that microaggressions are a problem.
Oh, you're so well-spoken.
Just imagine, instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite.
Ugh, it's a compliment.
Mosquito bites and their itch are one of nature's most annoying features. But if you're only bitten every once in a while,
No, where are you really from?
Cleveland?
sure, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more. Whether it's on a date,
Oh, your English is so good.
Excuse me?
going grocery shopping,
You know, everything happens for a reason.
I'm just buying apples.
commuting to work,
So when are you gonna have a baby?
watching TV,
We have to keep the Redskins' name. It's part of our culture and history.
or just walking down the street with your partner.
I couldn't even tell you were gay.
Mosquitoes seem to pop up everywhere.
Do you know John? Give me shopping advice.
They
I
do.
love Cher too.
And getting bit by mosquitoes every goddamn day,
Can I touch your hair?
multiple times a day,
So pretty. Can I
Can I
touch
touch
your
it,
hair?
please? Can I please?
is fucking annoying. And makes you want to go ballistic on those mosquitoes, which seems like a huge overreaction to people who only get bit every once in a while.
It's just a mosquito bite. Who cares?
Just another angry black woman.
Of course, beyond just being annoying, some mosquitoes carry truly threatening diseases that can mess up your life for years.
Astrophysics?
Maybe you should try less challenging, Major.
Ow, my dreams.
And other mosquitoes carry strains that can even kill you.
He looked like he was up to trouble, okay? I felt threatened.
So next time you think someone's overreacting, just remember, some people experience mosquito bites all the time.
You're all so exotic. Wow.
And by mosquito bites, we mean microaggressions.
Bow. Yeah, Fusion. That's a good, quick video. All right, so let's talk about automatic bias to end our discussion. So automatic bias, it's pretty heart-wrenching and pretty terrible. So this is Amadou Bailo Diallo. You might not know that name because this event occurred in 1999. Okay. He was a 23-year-old immigrant from Guinea, so that's a country in Africa, who was shot and killed in New York City in February 1999 by 4 NYPD plainclothes officers. In the early morning of February 4th, Diallo was standing near his building after returning from a meal. Police officers Edward McMillan, Sean Carroll, Kenneth Boss, and Richard Murphy passed by in a Ford Taurus. Observing that Diallo matched the description of a since-captured, well-armed serial rapist involved in the rape or attempted rape of 51 victims, they approached him. The officers were in plain clothes. The officers claimed they loudly identified themselves as NYPD officers and that Diallo ran up the outside steps toward his apartment house doorway at their approach, ignoring their orders to stop and show his hands. The porch light bulb was out and Diallo was backlit by the inside vestibule light. Ignoring their orders, showing only a silhouette, Diallo then reached into his jacket and withdrew his wallet. This matters for the studies that we're gonna talk about in just a second. Seeing the suspect holding a small square object, Carroll yelled "gun" to alert his colleagues. Believing Diallo had aimed a gun at them at close range, the officers opened fire on him. During the shooting, lead officer McMillan tripped backward off the front stairs, causing the other officers to believe he had been shot. The 4 officers fired 41 rounds, more than half of which went astray, but Diallo was hit 19 times. Now, the big question, which you can answer to yourself, is would officers have given Diallo more time to show whether he was dangerous if he had been white? I think you know the answer to that question. So this occurred 21 years ago. They haven't stopped. They have not stopped. These next couple of stories are just a drop in the bucket of for armed, unarmed black suspects shot and killed by the police. You have Tamir Rice, a teenager, much like Michael Brown. Both cases, the police officers were not charged with homicide. However, closer to home, although I guess for where I am, this is equal to Michael Brown and the Sherman Park in Milwaukee was St. Louis is closer. We have the situation where a police officer had been charged with homicide regarding the fatal shooting of a Sherman Park resident, which is a predominantly black suburb of Milwaukee, or part of the city. Milwaukee, by the way, is one of the most segregated cities in the United States, and there is a clear line that is a street that marks if you're north of this, that is black people residences, and then below this or south of this street, it is white. So we have a lot. And then we have the most recent of these, George Floyd. Well, actually, it's not really the most recent, but it is probably the most crushing of them, the most heart-wrenching, gut-punching of them, just because of how long the officer's knee was on George Floyd's neck. Nearly 9 minutes. Wasn't even shot like Diallo, Tamir Rice, Michael Brown, Ahmaud Arbery, the resident in Sherman Park. That's just name after name after name after name. Breonna Taylor asleep in her bed. Okay. So this was in Minneapolis. Again, not too far from us. May 25th, 2020. That was a month ago for me recording this. And when we talk about it, it will be 2 months. That's rough. It's real rough. So where is the research on this? What is the research saying? Well, the research is saying exactly what you might expect. So there's been a lot of study about this implicit automatic shooter bias in the last 20-25 years. Okay. One of the more famous of these tasks is from Correll from the University of Chicago back in 2002, and then repeated in replications and modifications from then on. So participants had to come to the lab and they did a video game task. And their goal was to, as quickly as possible, shoot a target if they were holding a weapon. Don't shoot if they were holding something else. It's a modified go, no-go task, okay? Which are very difficult because they are quick response tasks, and they don't allow you time to make a guess. So an invalid trial occurs if you've waited for more than a second to press a button, okay? So you have a half a second to choose, 500 milliseconds to choose invalid trial after that time, okay? And the independent variables were pretty clear, were plain as day in American society. The target race was either white or black, and the weapon was either present or absent. Everyone was holding something, but just like Diallo's case, they were either holding a gun or they were holding a wallet, as you can see here. And they were in crouching or standing positions. So and it's like bad Photoshop, but it was 2002. So we have situations where, okay, so these are 3 black trials. This one is holding a cell phone, so an old brick style cell phone. Here's the gun. Here's the wallet. And here is a white dude. And I can't tell what he's holding. I believe he's holding a wallet, but I'm not sure. So that's a white guy in a backdrop. He's going to get run over by a tram or trolley, whatever those are called. And then these are around, I believe this shot is on the University of Chicago's campus. And this, I'm not entirely sure where that is. Let me know in the comments below if you know. Okay. And so what they did was they measured dependent variables like you do. Okay. So the dependent variable was the number of errors that each participant committed. Okay. So if the participant was armed, an error was not shooting. Okay. So that's how that was coded. If it was a not armed case, cell phone wallet, for example, the error was shooting that person. Okay. Now, if you look at the data, what ends up happening is there's a main effect of race if you look only within the armed condition. Okay, so armed are the darker oranges. Okay, the target was white, and the number of errors is about a half a point out of 20 more. Okay, so that means they didn't shoot the white target as often as black targets, even if that white target was armed. Now, for the not armed condition, error is shooting, as I said, and these are the lighter orange color bars. Okay, main effect of race if you look within this condition. So almost, it's actually a full error more when the target is black holding something other than a gun versus a white person holding something other than a gun. Now, there is something else when you look at all the four bars together. It's what's called an interaction of these two variables. They interact with each other. So the effect of the weapon, so the presence of the gun, depends on who is holding it. Whether the gun is there or not, who is holding whatever. And that is to say that automatic bias / implicit bias, which is what you might be hearing these days, implicit bias training among police officers, etc. Implicit bias affects black individuals if they are holding a gun, or if they're not holding a gun, more than white individuals, regardless of what they're holding. Wow. And this is demonstrable in the last 15 years. This is demonstrable in the last 15 years. I could just throw case after case after case. So it's not even just George Floyd. It's of the people who have been shot, like Tamir Rice or Michael Brown, okay, or Diallo. Okay. And this has been replicated over and over and over again. And we see that normal people do this. So this data reflects participants in the lab, okay, college students. But they also replicated this with police officers. And police officers show the same bias, even if the police officer is black. So people of all races and genders show this bias over and over again. It is demonstrable. So what does this mean? Does it exonerate cops if you say that? No. No, it does not exonerate cops, because here's the problem. Cops should be trained in de-escalation rather than shoot to kill immediately. Okay? I do not buy my life was in danger argument. That's a personal opinion of mine. I don't buy it. But the science doesn't give them a pass. Doesn't exonerate them either. So you need to think of other interventions that can prevent these tragedies. You know, what is the bias rooted in? Well, it's rooted in racial stereotypes, most likely. And these stereotypes and prejudices are automatic. They cause us to behave before we even know we have behaved that way. That's a hard truth to swallow. It's a very difficult truth, and we will talk more about that in the live stream. Okay. And so that'll be it for this video. Please leave your comments and feedback down below. Come up with your questions. I'm sure you've got some burning questions for me. Yeah, until the next video, bye.